I had summited Everest. I had a really hard time summiting Everest, and I come back down to Camp 4. So Everest has 4 camps above base camp. You usually climb, it takes usually a couple months to climb Everest. I ended up climbing it in 3 weeks, which was kind of the edge of, human capacity with acclimatization and whatnot. Because I was coming from the North Pole. And I call my wife Jenna on a sat phone at Camp 4, just completely exhausted, having just summited Everest, taking me 12 hours, up and down just from the top part of the mountain. I'm still days away from climbing all the way back down to base camp and safety. At this point, I'd done 8 of the 9 expeditions for the Explorers Grand Slam, and I needed to climb Denali. And I was about a month ahead of the Explorers Grand Slam world record. Denali usually takes about 3 weeks to climb. So I call my wife and I say, hey, I just summited Everest. I'm exhausted. It just took me an hour to take my boots off and get inside my tent. I'm going to rest here for a while till tomorrow and slowly start making my way back down to hopefully more relative safely. I mean, granted, Camp 4 is at 26,000 feet. That's still known as the death zone. Like the human body, you're still in a really compromised, vulnerable spot there. Any good mountaineer will tell you, like, you don't really celebrate a climb until you're back down. About 80% of accidents happen on the descent. And 3 people actually died on Everest that same day that I summited in 2016. And I'm on my way, I'm there, and I get on the sat phone call, and she's like, so you summited? And I was like, yeah. And I was like, she's like, no frostbite, no injuries? I'm like, no, I'm exhausted, but like, I don't have any injuries or anything like that. She's like, okay, great. Then she said something I will never forget for the rest of my life. She says to me over the sat phone connect, she goes, well, in that case, I need you to put your boots back on right now. I'm like, what? Like, what are you talking about? She's like, yeah. I've been doing some sort of research, and it so happens that if you can get to the summit of Denali in the next week, you can set not 1, but 2 world records, not just the Explorers Grand Slam, but the 7 summits. And I'm like, wait, is that Denali in the next week? Like, I'm in the death zone on Everest. Denali takes 3 weeks to climb. Like, what the hell are you talking about? She goes, no. Okay, put your boots back on right now. I've made a plan. Go in one single push all the way back down to base camp. And in base camp, I've set up a helicopter that'll take you from base camp to Kathmandu. There's no time for you to sleep overnight in a hotel or shower or any of this, but an evening flight will take you from Kathmandu to Dubai, Seattle to Alaska. And yeah, instead of 3 weeks to climb Denali, you'll have 3 days. But if you could do all that, 2 world records. And I'm like, am I hallucinating? Like, what the hell is she talking about? Like, right, this is ridiculous. But she also knows how competitive and driven I am. So she knows if she dangles a carrot, it's something I'm going to at least try. And one of my favorite quotes that I've lived by for a really long time, that's really been a good anchor in my life, which is, it was said by Henry Ford, and some variation of it's been attributed to Confucius over the years. But it's basically, he who says he can and he who says he can't are both usually right. Mm-hmm. And I had no idea if we could pull off Jenna's ridiculous plan, but I did know I could at least follow her first step, put the boots back on. So I did that. And somehow just 100 hours after standing on the summit of Everest, I found myself on the other side of the world at the base of Denali, and ended up climbing Denali in just 3 days. Now, climbing Denali in 3 days, to answer your first question about the most difficult mountain, in 3 days instead of 3 weeks. The weather was terrible. Any normal person would have just waited in their tent for these 3 days, but I didn't have those 3 days to spare. A buddy of mine met me over there, and we went literally nobody on the mountain climbed those 3 days. They just sat in their tents, and we're out there like on the summit and 50, 60 mile per hour winds, getting beat up. And keep in mind, this wasn't just like climbing Denali like that anyways would be tough, but I was 139 days of nonstop climbing and world travel into this project. Like, I was on my last, that amount of energy, even by the time I showed up over there, let alone, getting to the summit of the mountain. So, but we ended up pulling it off with a day to spare for the second world record, and set 2 world records for the Explorers Grand Slam and the 7 summits.